So, I saw the Neon Demon. I didn't take any notes or anything, so I'm just gonna film myself talking about it because this movie was fucking wacky. Uh, okay, so I guess I'll talk about Nicolas Winding Refn a little bit, the director, first. You know, kind of what my expectations for this movie were. He's done a few movies now, probably like 7 or 8. I don't know, I've seen 4 of them. This is my 5th one. If you are unfamiliar with him, he's the Drive director. That's how I became aware of him. That's how pretty much everyone became aware of him, I think. And that caused me to become curious about some of his earlier work. So I saw 2 of his earlier movies, which are called Bronson and Valhalla Rising. Bronson's really good. It has Tom Hardy in it, and he plays Charles Bronson, the British prisoner. He's fucking great. Actually, I'd recommend Bronson if you can stomach violence. Valhalla Rising is also good and underrated, but it's really disturbing and upsetting. It's kind of a weird meditation on the idea of hell, but it's pretty beautiful visually, like all of his movies. That's the thing that is consistent in all of his movies. That's the only thing that's consistent in all of his movies, I would say, besides Lingering, but I'll get to that. But all of his movies are visually immaculate. They're pretty stunning. They're really immersive, too, and really unique. That's the key thing. I think that's why people like Drive so much. But the thing is, after Drive, he made a movie called Only God Forgives, and everyone had kind of a different reaction to that, because I think, to date, it's probably his most, violent movie, and up until this point was his most visually impressive movie, but it's not about anything. It's really as shallow as it comes off, and it's so beautiful that it kind of tricked me for a little while, and I did like it the first time I saw it. When you watch Nicolas Winding Refn actually talk about the movie, it's pretty fucking cringy, because he's essentially making shit up, because there's nothing. There's just nothing to that movie. So I was very curious, needless to say, how this movie was going to turn out. Had a lot going for it for me. I thought the trailer looked pretty awesome. I like Elle Fanning. I like Jenna Malone. I like Keanu Reeves. Cliff Martinez did the score again, so I was excited for that, because that was really good in Only God Forgives, even though the movie's kind of shitty. So, what is this movie about? That's a good fucking question. I guess that Elle Fanning plays an underage model who moves to Los Angeles kind of just, in hopes of, what every model who moves to Los Angeles hopes to do. She basically just kind of, plows right through everything. For whatever reason, everyone is, completely infatuated by her, so whether it be because she actually is just the most beautiful person in the world, or if it's, marketability, whatever. Anyway, she's kind of just, everyone is focusing on her now. And so that causes just, conflict with, other models who have already been, in LA. I guess this is a horror movie, and I think that's what he was going for. It's definitely not a fucking Blumhouse movie, if that's what you're expecting. There's not jump scares. There's not a family listening to, a tape recording that tells them who the villain is and what the movie's about. That shit doesn't happen. But what does happen is, this movie's kind of a mess, okay? And I'm gonna say I liked this movie. I did enjoy it, I think. I'm split. I have very mixed feelings on this movie, because visually, it's a fucking 10 the whole time. The visuals are amazing. Every single shot is great. It does add meaning to it a lot of the time, and there are shots that I can see, deeper implications. Just a little thing, but I happened to notice that the use of mirrors in this movie was pretty insane. The first shot is actually really trippy because of, the way that mirrors are incorporated into the cinematography. It's actually kind of mind-blowing. Yeah. The lighting is amazing, and it's kind of, it kind of transports you, because, every shot is so, otherworldly, and it has such a unique tone that it's pretty hard not to get, at least a little wrapped up in just the general tone and vibe of everything, because it is really unique and really, really, really nice to look at. I guess the other things I can say were definitely positive were some of the performances. Jenna Malone was pretty good. Elle Fanning was pretty good. They both had kind of sometimes not great dialogue to read, and I think that might have been a big problem with this movie, but before I get to that, they were good. I think, at some point I was able to start recognizing character traits and personalities, and I realized that like it wasn't just like the Only God Forgives kind of thing where it's like this character is aggressive, this character is quiet, this character kills people. Like they're just like I mean beyond one note. It's like half a note. This I started to see more personality. This definitely has more of a story than Only God Forgives, and there's definitely a lot more like intent. But the problem, right? Okay, the problem with this movie is that um, once again, Nicolas Winding Refn has made something that feels like it's not for fans. This feels like it's not for people who like his movies. This feels like a movie that's for people who don't like his movies. And that's pretty unfortunate for me because I do happen to like his movies. And so when I go to this expecting a certain thing and it's really exactly that thing, and that thing is really a 2 hour long movie that only exists to say, I told you so, and fuck you. I'm kind of underwhelmed. The the end of this movie had virtually no impact on me whatsoever, besides kind of laughing at some of the imagery because of how blunt it is. That's the thing with this movie, right? Is it is so obvious. Like every time they're trying to convey something on the screen, it's pretty like obvious what they're trying to convey. And when they try to fool you into thinking they are conveying something, it doesn't work at all, and it's really just pointless lingering. I want to give Nicolas Winding Refn more credit than that, and I'm not going to say that the whole movie is just people, like, looking at each other like Only God Forgives kind of was, but there's a lot of that in this movie, and it's hard to ignore. Like, there's a lot of times when people are just fucking staring at each other, and, by the end of the staring, nothing is different than it was at the beginning. No one learned anything. The characters aren't... I said they were, like, they're interesting. They're more interesting than the Only God Forgives characters, but, like, you don't know enough about them to be able to kind of get inside their head. And so when these characters are just fucking staring at each other, like, I'm kind of forced to imagine it on paper. Like, what even is this scene? What is this scene? What's the point of this scene? I'm not asking, like, what's happening, because I don't think there was a point in this movie where I felt, like, confused about what was happening, or, like, I didn't understand what was trying to be said. Like, it really didn't feel like that at all. Sometimes it did make me laugh how blunt the imagery was. I don't really want to spoil any of that in case, like, it works on some people, but I guess the best way I could describe this movie is it really is a style over substance, and that's unfortunate because I don't really consider that to be what Drive is, even though to a certain degree it is. Like, decidedly, I mean, it is more about the style than the story, but the story in Drive still is a very big part of the movie. Whereas this, there were a lot of times where I feel like the story stopped to have a visual. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. It honestly doesn't feel like a very fully realized idea to me. It's trying to make statements on the fashion industry and just beauty and vanity in general and what people consider beauty to even be. What this really feels like is if I was to go and read an article on something that made me angry, and then I wrote a screenplay on it in a day, and then read it the next day and went, some of this holds up, some of this doesn't make a lot of sense. And then I just filmed it and, like, released it, like, wide release. Like, that's kind of what this movie feels like. It says things, and it does things that, I feel are very opinionated, and I think this movie has a very strong opinion on the fashion world and beauty in general. Like I said, I think Nicolas Winding Refn has a very strong opinion on it, but by the end of the movie, I didn't really get a sense of what that opinion actually was, besides the fact that he just wanted to make the people who disagreed with him angry. And that feels to me like a very weak way to convey your argument. Like, yeah, that kind of bothered me a little bit. Because the problem is that, like, when the movie ends, there's not anything left to think about. There's not anything that's open to interpretation, really. Okay, I think the problem is that there's really, like, not much left to think about once the movie ends. I guess really what this movie is a slow burn. And so, like, the problem is that once it gets to that thing that it's building to, I was like, oh, okay, that's the end. And I was like, wait. Like, I think I even said this in the theater. I was like, wait, please don't let this be the ending of the movie. And then that was the end of the movie. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I kind of yelled in the theater. I was the only person in the theater. Like, I get that Nicolas Winding Refn has a strong opinion on these things for whatever reason, but I'm just gonna point out he's a fucking film director, and you might not have the best understanding of this world that you're criticizing so heavily. And, like, the problem is that this movie's not like a satire or anything, so when people start acting like fucking caricatures, it starts to feel almost a little disrespectful. So here's the weird thing about having to grade this movie and, like, actually try and think about it from an objective standpoint, is visually, from an objective standpoint, it's nearly perfect, but, like, from a story standpoint, I would have done it completely differently. And I think there are things that could be completely taken out of this movie, and it would make it almost even better, honestly. But here's the tricky part, right? Is I try to judge movies based on what the director is going for, really, like what kind of movie they were trying to make. So I try to separate what I want the movie to be from what they want the movie to be. Nicolas Winding Refn has kind of referred to himself as a pornographer at this point, and has admitted to fetishizing violence and having a fetish for violence. So when shit in this movie happens that's like a kind of out of left field, it's like, I mean, fuck, that's what he's going for. So what do I do? As expected, this was a pretty fucking polarizing movie, because that's kind of just how all of his movies are. I mean, even Drive, like, a lot of people were pretty put off by that movie when it initially came out. I guess the hard thing with this movie is that I don't really know who its audience is. It's not art house film goers, because they're gonna laugh at a lot of the shit that's in here and how serious it's all played. Like, by definition, this movie is kind of fucking pretentious, and that's too bad, because I really, really love Drive, but this movie is acting like it has more substance than it really does, similar to Only God Forgives. The other thing is that this movie's honestly just not that original. I mean, this is pretty much the exact same premise as Starry Eyes, which came out in 2014, and, like, that movie's not that great, but, like, it's kind of really, really similar, like, even in, like, terms of message and stuff, and formatting, too, oddly. Now that I think about it, there were actually a lot of celebrities in this movie who just kind of show up, just, like, have, like, really, really small parts. Like, Keanu Reeves has a really small part, Christina Hendricks shows up for a second, just to be in the movie, I guess, because she was in Drive, so, you know, of course she's got to be in this one. You know, here's the thing, is that this movie is really unbalanced, and there's a lot of stuff that's not too great about it, but if I'm being honest with myself, I was pretty engaged the whole time. It felt more sure-handed, and I want to give Nicolas Winding Refn more credit, and the truth is that there were parts of this movie that I thought were fucking amazing. There were actually some scenes that worked really well. I thought there was some dialogue that actually showcased the characters' like motivations and inner desires really, really powerfully, and like subtly too. It's just that there's a lot of subtlety kind of stripped from this movie, unfortunately. I think that the response from Only God Forgives being so negative and so decidedly we need more from you, or we need like an explanation or something like that, because Only God Forgives is so just like, it's so empty that people were just craving more. So I think that what Nicolas Winding Refn interpreted that in this movie as is, I'm still going to have the crazy imagery and the abstract visuals, but then I'm going to have someone just explain them to you in case you didn't get it. That was really annoying to me, because like at the end of the movie, it's not exactly shown what happens. At the end of the movie, you would absolutely understand what happens, but before that, they have someone practically look in the camera and tell you exactly what happened. And that was really disappointing to me, because I was like, I fucking know. Like, there were so many times where I wanted to yell at the screen and go, I fucking get it. It's not that I'm sitting there like, where's my horror movie? I'm sitting there like, where's my fucking art house movie? Where's my challenging, thought-provoking ideas? I didn't get any of that. Like, I got maybe a tiny bit of it. It hints at it. There is an idea here, but it needs more blossoming, if that makes sense. They're just little beginnings of arguments here, and little statements, but like, the thing is that when characters are just talking about this stuff, it's like, who are they talking to? They're just talking to the audience. This is not a conversation that is happening between these people. This is meant for us, because we need to hear this information, otherwise the story wouldn't make any sense. Something that I did like about this movie, though, was its general kind of like, boldness, I'll say, because there are some things that it does and goes for that are not things that I would put in a wide release movie. There are some things that I was just laughing my ass off in the theater that it was even in the movie, and like normal people would probably be like walking out at that point. So I did kind of respect this movie actually, and I think that's why I was able to enjoy it, even though like there's just so much missing, and it's too bad because the visuals make something really special, but the screenplay is not exactly there to hold it up the whole time. Some of the acting really just isn't that great, but some of it is really good. I thought Elle Fanning was really good, as I said, and I thought Jenna Malone was really good too. Jenna Malone has a very interesting scene in this movie. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. As far as recommendations go, though, it's a pretty slim audience. If you liked his other movies, I guess you'll probably like this one too. It's pretty much the same thing, but if you've never seen one of his movies, definitely don't start with this one. You'll probably hate this movie. If you don't like violence, you'll probably hate this movie. If you don't like sex, you'll definitely hate this movie. If you don't like anything about the horror genre or like stylistic art house movies, there is literally nothing in this movie for you. So again, slim audience, but I think you know who you are. If you think you'll like this movie, you'll probably like this movie. Honestly, like if it looked good to you, you'll probably like it. But just know that it's pretty twisted and fucked, and like there are a few things you'll see that you might wish you had not seen. Just a few, even though I thought there weren't nearly as many as people are building it up to be. Final thoughts, I'm still a little on the fence about this movie. I think the fact that I want to see it again says something about it. So maybe I'll like it more the next time. I'm going to hold off on giving it like a solid grade. 6 or 7 is probably about fair. But I don't know, maybe I'll discover a whole new layer and be completely wrong about this movie. It could happen. I'm not a fucking genius. Sorry for the general lack of structure in this video. I didn't plan for it at all. Like, I wasn't actually expecting to do a video for this. It's just, it kind of, this was a weird movie. But I would like to do more of these in the future. And so, if people enjoyed this, let me know. Future videos would be, like, better in terms of, like, structure and, like, jokes and stuff. Like, this was really just me, like, rambling. So, yeah, if you enjoyed this, then I promise it'll get better.
Before we go